Begin with developments from the UN Security Council. A U.S. drafted resolution imposing an arms embargo on South Sudan has been approved. The resolution received the minimum 9 yes votes on Friday. In addition to an immediate arms embargo, the resolution imposes a travel ban and asset freezes on a current Deputy Defense Chief and former Army Chief.
Thank you. The result of the voting is as follows: 9 votes in favor, 6 abstentions. The draft resolution has been adopted as Resolution 24/28/2018.
Security Council members that abstained from that vote include Ethiopia, which argues the timing is not right given attempts to revitalize the peace process in South Sudan. The U.S., however, maintains ending the flow of weapons is the only way to stop the violence in the country, arguing that previous ceasefires have been repeatedly violated.
We are in a very critical juncture in the peace process in South Sudan. The high-level revitalization forum has made notable progress, and for the first time in a long while, there is some hope for a possible breakthrough. The parties have already reached an agreement on security arrangements, and the reports from Khartoum are indicating that they are closer than they have ever been to reach an agreement on governance issues.
The goal of this resolution is simple. If we're going to help the people of South Sudan, we need the violence to stop. And to stop the violence, we need to stop the flow of weapons to armed groups and that they're using to fight each other and to terrorize the people. Stop the weapons, stop the violence. It is a resolution that everyone on this council should support.
Indeed, a difficult and divisive issue at the Security Council. To discuss this further, we're now joined by CGTN's Liling Tan in New York. Liling, of course, the UN Security Council, some might say, is seeking to exert its influence on the fledgling peace process in South Sudan. What more can you tell us about the arms embargo decision today?
Well, this was more of a compromise among Security Council members than it was a unanimous decision to exert itself over the South Sudan conflict. Now, as you mentioned, it was pushed by the United States. That is correct. And it was voted in favor by 9 countries. But a lot of intensive negotiations occurred before Friday morning's vote here at the UN Security Council. Negotiations that changed the language so that the vote could pass and so that it would address the concerns of some of the Security Council members that had previously expressed a lot of concerns about the need for an arms embargo at this time. Now, as we have it now, there is the ban on weapons, including ammunition, paramilitary equipment, military vehicles, as well as assistance on the technical and financial aspects. So this goes into effect and will be in effect until May next year. Now, the U.S. had, under the Obama administration, pushed for this arms embargo from 2 years back, but that was previously defeated in the Security Council. The sense now among these council members is that patience is running thin over the inability of warring factions in South Sudan to reconcile or seriously engage in a peace process. Among the 6 countries who abstained, and bear in mind there were no objections or no vetoes, this was an abstention by 6 countries, including, as you mentioned, Ethiopia, which is, of course, a neighbor of South Sudan, but also Permanent Security Council members China and Russia. And the broad contention is that any kind of punitive action right now, sanctions, arms embargo, would be counterproductive to the political peace process. But U.S. Ambassador Nikki Haley pointed out that ceasefires have been violated, and as we've been seeing in news reports, even the latest peace deal of late June has been violated, with both sides accusing each other of violating that cessation of hostilities. So really the message here from the Security Council as a whole in passing this resolution is that enough is enough.
Well, indeed, as you mentioned, Ethiopia was one of those countries that argued that sanctions at this point might work against the peace process in South Sudan. A legitimate argument indeed. But considering, as you say, that this is a compromise, that this is evidence of patience running thin, what should we expect from the UN going forward?
Well, now that this resolution has been adopted with renewed sanctions, 2 new individuals added to the blacklist, and the arms embargo, the UN as a whole, its 193 member nations, need to now implement and enforce these sanctions as sanctions systems or regimes work here with the UN and with its member states. But bear in mind, too, that in addressing conflicts like what we're seeing in South Sudan, the UN has 2 key approaches. One is a political track and the other is the punitive track. So we have the sanctions already, and now the UN, which has, as a system, has long supported a resolution of this conflict and will continue to do so on the diplomatic front. So it will continue its supportive and mediative role through its mission on the ground known as UNMISS, as well as through the Secretary General's Special Envoy, David Shearer, who basically leads the UN's, represents the UN's mediation role in this conflict. So we have the political track and, of course, the diplomatic track that the UN is actively engaged in.
All right, Liling Tan, thank you so much for that, joining us there live from New York. Now, meanwhile, South Sudan's government says this extension of its tenure, rather the extension of its tenure of office by the country's parliament is to ensure there is no constitutional vacuum in the country. Juba says the move does not threaten the current peace talks. Here's CGTN's Patrick Oyet with more.
The extension means the mandate of South Sudan's government runs until August 2021. The current government is in power because of an extension made in 2015 after a peace deal was signed between opposition group led by Riek Machar and President Kiir. The 2015 extension was set to expire next month. This week's extension marks an end to a previous plan by government to hold elections before August this year in the absence of a peace deal with opposition groups. Some members of the international community, including the United States of America, have condemned the extension of government's tenure in office, but Juba says the move is legal and justified.
This is not to go against peace agreement. Peace agreement will be incorporated into the extended tenure should the parties sign peace agreement at any time. So it should not worry anybody. It is a matter of the sovereignty of the Republic of South Sudan. We don't need permission from anybody to extend the tenure of the government. We have institutions. And this government, by the way, was elected in 2010. And it was supposed to renew its mandates through election in 2015, had it not been for the fact that the war erupted before.
Juba says it remains committed to the peace process currently underway in Sudan's capital, Khartoum, and that once an agreement is reached with opposition groups, President Kiir's government would be ready to implement it. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
Now, more than 1 million South Sudanese have, over the past few years, fled to Uganda. They're following developments back home closely and are concerned about the latest stalemate in the peace process. Thousands of South Sudanese refugees choose to live in Kampala instead of in UN refugee camps in a bid to earn a living while they're in Uganda. Many, of course, hope to return home one day. CGTN's Hilary Ayesiga spoke to some refugees who are longing for their warring leaders to strike a deal.
So it shows that there is a lot of...
Saddened by the turn of events, Francis Lodi, a South Sudan refugee, is concerned about a setback in the peace process back home. He's been living in Uganda since 2013, when war broke out in South Sudan. But now he's tired of living in exile.
As I told you, everything of mine is gone, but I believe still I can start. I can still start from the beginning. If we go back, we can start. Because that is your home, that is where you belong,
Lodi says life in Kampala is costly.
You see how our people are here, running up and down, even food they cannot rent, they cannot do. It is very difficult. And look at our country. The country is down completely. Economy is down completely. So we need to go back and build our economy. We want to go back and build schools, build hospitals, build roads. We want to go back and build ourselves. That's what we want to go. We don't want to stay in somebody's country.
Lodi is not alone. Fellow refugee Nyaloni Gatwang says she can hardly scrap a living in Kampala. She hopes South Sudanese leaders can resolve their differences soon.
We are really tired of running from one place to another. To a given point, they should consider us the young youth, consider us the upcoming generation at least, to give us a say in this process.
Riek Machar was reinstated as first vice president in a deal struck by regional leaders in Uganda about a week ago. But an official of Machar's rebel group rejected the deal, saying it was unacceptable. As regional leaders prepare to meet again to hammer out the final details of the peace process, there is hope that these concerns will be addressed so that peace could prevail in the world's youngest nation. Hilary Esiga, CGTN, Kampala.